Okay, so let me just record. Okay. So I want to start by saying, we're doing this heavy duty cleaning for Pesach, and we have two ovens, one for meat and one for dairy, and I think I blew my meat oven today from overheating, so I'm a little depressed about that. But okay. So it seems clear to me that the time has come to address sort of a sensitive issue. When I prepare a class for you, I'm always looking for what I call the universal wisdom of Torah. Okay. The lessons that are derived from Torah that can help anybody grow closer to Hashem, to improve their midot, which are the virtuous character traits that a person has, and also just lessons from the Bible that I think are universally applicable. But it is also important for me to be clear, and maybe I haven't been clear enough about this, that there are parts of the Torah that are specifically and exclusively intended for the Jewish people. Now, I don't know what the percentage balance is between these two parts, between the universal, let's say, and the particular, but they exist side by side in the Torah that we all care about and that we're here to work on together, to study together. So as much as you as a non-Jew or your community, if you're lucky enough to have one, want to follow the Torah, whatever that means, observe God's laws, some parts of the Torah are simply not intended for non-Jews. So as a matter of fact, even a candidate who's in the process of converting to Judaism is not allowed to keep all of the laws until after their conversion is complete. So let's say that it is you, I'm just making some, a person is getting ready to convert to Judaism. It's a week before they're supposed to complete the process. That Shabbat, they're not allowed to keep Shabbat in all of its details because they're not Jews yet. So how much more so is that true for people who aren't on a path to take on what we refer to as the yoke of Torah, the entirety of Torah. I was trying to think of a good analogy for it, and I was thinking of when you're if you're a classroom teacher, you have certain um, privileges that your students don't have. You have a bunch of eighth graders or whatever, but you also have certain responsibilities that your students don't have. And that's kind of what I was alluding to in the WhatsApp group as questions came up, both in the group together and things that people asked me individually. This area of Jewish law, this area of halacha, is not particularly well developed. And it's a problem. What I'm speaking of is how do we guide Torah aware non-Jews and their observance according to Jewish law when they actively want to do more than the minimum? We certainly know the minimum, and that's what the rabbis, this is me editorializing, but the rabbis who are leading the Noahide movement in general, um, their approach has been, in my view, to have non-Jews do as kind of as little as possible. Um, but I know that there are with us today and in other places non-Jews who want to do much more than is the minimum. And that's where it gets confusing. So, and Pesach is one of those places where these things come up because the laws are so intricate and so forth. So we can speak about, and I will speak about when I finish this little soapbox piece, we can speak about the meanings of certain rituals, the lessons we can learn from them. But that's very different than taking upon yourself all of the laws that only apply to the Jewish people. So I know that this is uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable for me to say, and it's uncomfortable for some of you to hear. But when a non-Jew does, I'm going to call it, for lack of a better word, overreach, then you're not actually following Torah. Especially if you are a person who still considers yourself a follower of Jesus, what results is some kind of a hybrid religion. So it's not possible to have the full obligations of a Jew, the full responsibility of the Jew, and also the freedom of a non-Jew. Because to be a Jew obligates a person in the entire slate of the biblical mitzvot, which you all know is 613, and all of the laws that are around that, and to make a mistake or to fail to do something that you're supposed to do or to do something you're not supposed to do, that's a sin and has to be addressed as a sin if you're a Jew. A non-Jew is not similarly obligated. And the exact parameters of what's permissible for a non-Jew is actually a matter of rabbinic debate. So that's my first point. And when it comes to Passover and preparations for Passover, some of you are doing things that you don't need to be doing. Now, is it a sin for you to not eat anything, whatever, to throw things away that are perfectly fine for you to have during Passover as a non-Jew? It's not a sin. It's just um, it's hard to find the right balance, and it just came so clear to me. It became so clear to me as I was fielding people's questions that there's so much to take from Passover as a non-Jew, which I'm going to get to, but it isn't necessary for you on the level of a Jew to prepare your homes and to change your diet and all of that. Okay, I think I've made that point. Now I have a second point to make that I think is even more uncomfortable for some of you. So 2 years ago, one of our members, whose name is Donna Jolie, who's not with us right now, she asked me if she runs a Christian tour company, and she asked me if she could bring some tourists, Christian tourists, to our Seder table in Israel. And my husband and I talked about it, and we decided that it would be too uncomfortable to do a Seder for Jews and have Christians at the table. So what we decided to do that year is we told her, invite as many Christians as you want. We'll turn the whole thing into a teaching experience, and we will prepare a traditional Seder for a Christian audience. And that's what we did. And so we prepared very differently for that experience than for our what would be a traditional Passover Seder. Now, the Passover Seder began in its simplest form in Egypt, just days before the newly freed slaves were able to leave Egypt. And each year, for more than 3,300 years, their descendants, who are the Jewish people, mark this date with a Passover Seder. So, although the form of the Seder has developed over time, the fundamentals are the same, that we take this evening ritual to remember the miracles that God performed for our people. That's what the Jews do. Okay. So now there's a sort of sensitive and important point I want to make. There's some of you may know David Nekrutman. I'm not sure how to pronounce him. Nekrutman. I'm not sure. He is currently the executive director of something called Biblical Excavations, and he recently published something called Your Passover Invitation for a Christian Audience. And he writes about how most Christians associate Passover with the Last Supper instead of with the much older story of the Exodus. And so they Christologize, I'm not sure that's a word, the
Mhm.
Seder, and they embellish it with Christian symbolism, like identifying Jesus as the Passover offering and identifying Jesus as the middle matzah, which is the matzah that we break, and so forth. It is important for me to say that as Jews, we find this practice and the claim that the Passover experience points to Jesus as Messiah or whatever as offensive, and as a remnant of replacement theology. It's uncomfortable for me to say that to you, but it is the case. The Israelites left Egypt in the Hebrew year 2448, which was 1313 BCE. Now it's 5785, which is 3,337 years later. For 3,337 years, Jews have been celebrating Passover. And that's approximately 1350 years before Jesus even began his ministry. And this tradition has continued unbroken among the Jewish people. Passover, as far as I know, is the most celebrated Jewish holiday, even among people who like aren't so, even people who aren't so religious. Because, and God commanded us in Exodus chapter 12, God commanded us to do this like for our all of our generations. In this document that he prepared, your Passover invitation that he wrote for Christians, David basically rewrote the traditional Haggadah for Christians to better reflect not inserting Jesus into the Passover Seder, but the universal themes of Passover using traditional Passover symbols. Now, you guys are obviously free to do whatever you like in terms of your Passover, your own personal Passover observance, but I was picking up so many threads that can lead to misunderstandings, and I wanted to express my understanding as clearly and as lovingly as I can, not to judge, God forbid, but never to judge, but to teach.
Mhm.
So that's my soapbox, and I appreciate that none of you have left the room. Um, For the rest of tonight's class, I'm going to do my best to explain, as I always do, how to better understand an authentic Torah perspective on the Seder. And I have a lot of material, probably more than we can finish. And actually, as I was preparing, I was thinking I really could talk about this for 6 hours or more. Um, but I want to talk about three reasons why non-Jews might actually want to hold not a Jesus Seder. That's not the right way to say it, but you know what I'm saying? Like a Seder that weaves in themes from Christianity, but a traditional Passover Seder. Um, the Passover Seder commemorates a paradigm shifting event for the nation of Israel. And yet, there are reasons why somebody who's not part of the nation of Israel might want to hold a Seder completely separate from the Christian overlay. Number one, the Exodus from Egypt was an enormous step in the process of redemption, and it's going to remain, our rabbis say, the most important redemption story until the arrival of Mashiach. And so all of us are kind of plugged into the redemption story, and this piece of it is an enormous part of it. That's number one. Number two, the story of the Exodus from Egypt and the journey of the nation of Israel takes up about 80% of the first five books of Moses. So the book of Bereshit, the book of Genesis, before Moshe is born, that's not really so much about this, but the rest of the five books of Moses are all about that. That's the Exodus from Egypt, the 40 years in the desert, the how to conduct yourself in the desert, how to conduct yourself when you enter the land, a review of the whole story. And so for those like us who revere the Hebrew scripture, the Seder is a way of honoring this grand significance of this enormous biblical event. Totally legitimate. And then an idea that I got from David was that uh, if your friend had a birthday, or last night we went to, actually, some of you may know Guidon Ariel and his wife
Mhm.
Deborah. I don't know, some of you may know him. He married off a child last night. They married off a child last night, and we went to the wedding. And when you go to an event that celebrates a birthday or a wedding or whatever, we would call it a simcha, whatever happy, joyous occasion, of it's not your wedding, it's not your birthday party, but you still participate because um, you are connected to
Mhm.
whoever's event it is. And so non-Jews can participate in Passover in order to celebrate the redemption of the children of Israel along with the children of Israel. There's nothing wrong with that. So those are the three reasons that I came up with. If you have others, I'd love to hear them. Okay. Um, this Why is Passover so concerned about what we eat? That is, what the heck does that have to do with God releasing slaves after 210 years and freeing them to be to become their own nation. Why are we now? You all know, I imagine that you all know the whole story. We eat matzah because we left in a hurry and the dough didn't have time to rise, blah, blah, blah. That is a first grade answer. Okay. I'm going to give you a grown-up answer. Okay. Pesach is in part a spiritual rectification for the sin of eating from the Eitz Hadas Tov Ra, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the Garden of Eden. That was a sin of what we ate. So we correct for that sin by guarding what we eat. So Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve, failed to guard what they put in their mouths in the Garden of Eden. Passover, by very strictly guarding what we put in our mouths, serves as a spiritual correction for that. Um, okay, I want to talk about a deeper understanding of the blood on the doorposts of the Israelite homes. So Egyptians worshipped the lamb. The lamb was a symbol of what we now call Aries, which is the astrological sign of this time of year, like late March to late April, which is exactly when Passover falls. And in truth, the constellations in heaven are tools of Hashem, but the Egyptians thought they were gods themselves, and so they worshiped them. In the 210 years when the Israelites served in Egypt as slaves, they absorbed some of this thinking and also participated in basically what amounts to idol worship. Now, the first 8 plagues were meant to break the Israelites of this taint of idol worship, to convince them that God alone is the only ruling force in the world. And so the plagues had two purposes. They served to punish the Egyptians, but also to restore, to like scrape away. I'm not sure exactly the right way to say it, to separate the Israelites from any notion that idol worship was a correct form of worship, and to reconnect them to the God of Israel, the one creator and sustainer of the world. Okay, so that's the first 8 plagues. The Israelites who, after 8 plagues, are still not convinced, they're still holding on to something of idol worship, they died in the ninth plague, which is the plague of darkness. Okay. So after the ninth plague, there's only the Israelites left that maybe still have a slight trace of idol worship clinging to them, but they really want to connect to Hashem Echad, to the one God. And so what does Hashem do to say, I want to finish this cleansing process with you. Here's how we're going to do it. You need to capture and restrain for, I think it's 4 days, and eventually slaughter the lamb, the symbol of Egyptian idol worship. And then you need to use the blood to cover the doorpost. Why? Because you are now required to advertise to the Egyptians what you've done. And that took a lot of courage because the Egyptians could have killed them over it, right? They are no longer slaves, but in the they are still in Egypt, and the Egyptians could very well have killed them over it. And that, what we call Mesirut Nefesh, that like self-sacrifice, putting your life on the line to follow God, proves that they had completed their repentance. They had done complete tshuva, no longer carried even a hint of idol worship. And that's why in the Israelite homes, there was no death of the firstborn. Okay. Their complete separation from idol worship protected them from that. Now, let's go on and talk about the Haggadah, because the Haggadah doesn't actually tell the story of the Exodus. If you want to know the story of the Exodus, you have to go to the book of Shemot, to the book of Exodus, and read chapters 1 through 16. The Haggadah assumes you. Is it clear to you what I mean by? Is there anybody who doesn't know what I mean when I say Haggadah? The
Mhm.
Anybody? Okay, you with me? Okay. Um, It assumes that the people using a Haggadah know the basic story and it takes it deeper. The text of the Haggadah begins in Aramaic, which is the spoken language in Babylon where it was first put together. That was a country of exile for the Jewish people. And it ends with a traditional song in Aramaic. The song is called Chad Gadya. I think in English it's like a little goat or some it's I don't know exactly what the title of the song is. Yeah, okay. All right, and everything in between is in Hebrew. But the Haggadah is not structured like a storybook, and it can seem very disjointed. And that's because it's a rabbinic text, and that the rabbinic style is nonlinear. However, I'm going to try to give you um, some patterns. I guess that's a good way of saying it. Some patterns that we find in the Seder, that we find in the Haggadah, that will help make this nonlinear text make a little bit more sense to you. First of all, I want to say that 15 is a significant number in the Seder. Passover begins on the night of the 15th of Nisan. Now, I might have said this last week. I don't know, but it's a very cool teaching that we don't celebrate Passover on the 15th of Nisan because it's a simple anniversary of when we left Egypt. We left Egypt on the 15th of Nisan because Nisan is a month of redemption. There's certain times of the year, according to Torah thinking, that have they have a certain quality. They have a certain quality. And Nisan has the quality of redemption. Okay. So the Exodus happened on the 15th of Nisan because Nisan has this quality of redemption, right? And so that quality recurs every year around this time. There are 15 steps of the Seder, and Dayenu, which is one of the steps of the Seder, we're going to get to. What, it's not actually one of the official ones, but it is part of the Seder, has 15 statements. Okay. So there's a lot of different ways to look at the 15 steps of the Seder. There's the first part and that comes before the meal, and then the second part. So I'm gonna um I'm gonna sing for you. Don't usually do this. I'm gonna sing for you how we do it at our Seder table, the 15 steps of the Seder. And what we do, which is I saw it for the first time in my father-in-law's Seder table. His soul should rest in peace. First, at the very beginning, we sing all 15 parts of the Seder. And then when we move to the next one, we only sing up till that part and then abruptly stop. So I'm going to explain this all to you. But just to tell you, this is what it sounds like. Kadesh orchatz, karpas yachatz, magi rakza, motzi matzah, maror korich, shulchan orich, tzafun barich, halel nirtza. Okay, I don't have the best voice in the world, but anyway, it's way more fun when everybody at the table is singing the same. But that's what we do, and then when we, for example, we're ready for Kadesh, which is the very first part, which Kadesh literally means to sanctify, and it's making the Kiddush blessing over the first cup of wine. There are 4 cups of wine in the Seder. We would sing Kadesh, and then we don't say anything else. That's how it works. Okay, so Kadesh is to make the Kiddush over the first of the 4 cups of wine. Orchatz is where you wash your hands without a blessing. Karpas means an appetizer. It's usually a piece of celery, a potato. Um, some people, I think, maybe use parsley. Yachatz is where we break the middle matzah. Magid is where we, as much as it is told, not in a linear fashion, but we tell the story of the Exodus. Um, I'll tell you that. So my oldest daughter has children now. We have grandchildren, and the Seder that we have now is very child oriented. But before she had children, she and her husband came to us, and for some reason that year there were just the 4 of us. And when we got up to Magid, we left the table, we went to the living room, and we had all prepared different insights, and we had a 4-hour Magid. Now that is not typical, but it's one of my my warmest Passover memories, and I probably won't get that again ever again. I don't know, not while my grandchildren are little. The next step is rakza, which is where you wash your hands with a blessing, because we just like you do before um, making a motzi on challah, we are about to make motzi, which is the blessing over the matzah, and then eat some matzah. That's motzi and matzah. Then comes korech, which is where we eat matzah and maror together. Shulchan Orech is the festive meal. Now, by that point, the truth is we have had a couple of glasses of wine or grape juice and a bunch of matzah. Um, I skipped matzi, maror, and korech. So there's a lot of eating, but it's not really a meal yet. Now it's time to eat the festive meal, which especially in Israel, I don't know, it depends on where you are in the world, but this year we can't start the Seder until Shabbat, which precedes it, is completely over, which is like something like 7:45 p.m. So by the time we get to this meal, it's a couple, 2 or 3 hours later, and it's quite late to have a big meal. Some people do have a big meal, but some people just they'll have soup or soup and like chicken or something simple. Um, and then there's the part called safun, which is once when we broke in the matzah, we hide the larger part. And in order to finish the meal, tafun is the dessert. It's the last thing that you're supposed to eat in the evening. There's a whole game that you play with kids that either a kid hides it and the adult has to find it, or an adult hides it and the kid has to find it, and then they get a prize for it because you can't finish until you've eaten the piece of the afikomen. And then barich is grace after meals, as it would be um, with any Shabbat meal or holiday meal. And then comes the second part of the Seder, which a lot of people, depending on like how traditional they are, some of them don't even do it. But the second part of the Seder has two parts, Hallel and Nirtza. And basically, Hallel is Psalms of praise. It's actually Psalm 113 to 118. It's a major part of Jewish liturgy, but it's also just Psalms 113 to 118. And then Nirtza means that we accept the Seder in all its observances, and then the whole thing's over. Okay, I'm going to review some of the most well-known and important parts of the Seder and just try to go a little bit deeper with them. So um, there's a part that you may know as the four questions. In Hebrew, it is called Ma Nishtana, and it is traditionally sung by the youngest child at the Seder. The two Hebrew words, Ma Nishtana, can also be understood as a question in and of itself, which is, um, can we change? The four questions literally mean what is different. That's how it's understood. What's different about this night? How is this night different from all other nights? Blah, blah. But it hints to the idea that the ability to change is a fundamental part of being a human being. And I thought that was a lovely lesson coming from Manish Chana. Now, you may also be familiar with the part of the four children, sometimes called the four sons. Um, and so the Passover Haggadah says the Torah speaks of four sons, the wise, the rebellious, the simple one, and the one who doesn't know how to ask. The origin of the four sons tradition or the four children is fascinating because four times in four different places, the Torah addresses the responsibility to tell this story to the next generation. Three of them are in the book of Exodus in Parshat Bo, which we did some weeks ago, right after the actual Exodus story, and once in Devarim, in Deuteronomy, at the end of the 40 years in the desert. So the first is in Exodus chapter 12, the very um, well, you'd have to go back from where we are in Leviticus in Vayikra, chapter 12, verses 25 to 27. And this is what it says. When you enter the land that God will give you as he promised, observe this ceremony, meaning the Passover Seder, And when your children say to you, what does this ceremony mean to you? Then tell them it is the Passover sacrifice to God who passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt and spared our homes when he struck down the Egyptians. That is the answer that you give to the first child. The second time is in Shemot in the book of Exodus, chapter 13, verse 8. On that day, tell your son, I do this because of what God did for me when I came out of Egypt. So now it's addressing the rebellious son who doesn't think any of this applies to him. The third is in Exodus chapter 13, verse 14. In days to come, when your son asks you, what does this mean? Say to him, with a mighty hand, God brought us out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. Okay, so that is the simple, it's just a very simple explanation for a simple child. And the fourth passage, which is in the book of Deuteronomy, in the book of Devarim, chapter 6, verse 20, is says in the future, when your son asks you, what is the meaning of the stipulations, decrees, and laws that the Lord our God has commanded you, you tell him, we were slaves of Paro in Egypt, but God brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand. This child is so far removed from the story that he doesn't relate to it at all, and so you have to answer him in a different way. It's very interesting in the Hebrew. This is one of my favorite things. My family has heard it because I say it year after year when we get to this point. In the Hebrew, it says when you're answering the child who doesn't know how to formulate a question, you say at patach lo, which literally means you open it. Patach, patuach, pticha, all these words are related to the concept of opening. You have to open it for him. But there's a difference in the gender. At means you feminine. If I were addressing any of you, I would say at, but lo is masculine. Now you generally would expect that this question would be answered by the father. So it should say atapatach petuchalo. You should, I think that's the right you should answer for him. You should open it up for him, meaning you have to explain it from the very beginning. What's fascinating is that it says at, and there's two explanations for this. At is spelled Aleph Taf, which is the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet and the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet. So one explanation is like saying you have to explain it like A to Z because he doesn't know anything. This child who's asking the question, you have to say everything. So it's embedded in the word at. But the other explanation, which I like even better, is that you have to speak to this child in a maternal kind of way, in a feminine kind of way, in a softer kind of way, because this child is so uninformed and so disconnected from the history of his own people that he can't even formulate a sentence. And so that's the approach. Okay. Now, why do we need four separate passages to make this point? Because our sages, in their attentiveness to nuance, they understand that in that Moshe, who says all of these four statements, is addressing four different types of children, and we have to speak. There's an intimation that we have to speak to each of our children, but we can't speak in the same language, in the same way with the same language to each child. And that's what modern educational techniques for the last 50 years or so would say, that something that the Torah articulated 3,300 years ago by communicating this story in four different passages, in four different ways, addressing four different types of children. And each child requires a different approach. According to their challenges, their strengths, their level of connection, and so forth. Um, there's an interesting um, correspondence of these four children to four generations of American Jews. That's the way that I learned it. That the wise child is like the first generation that came over from Europe that was still completely religious. The next generation is rebellious. That is the children of the immigrants who threw off some of the many of the Torah observances. The third generation from immigration is the simple one, the one that doesn't know much about Judaism at all because his parents, he knows his grandparents, or she knows her grandparents were or still are ritually observant, but didn't grow up seeing that in their home, and so they have a very simplistic understanding of Judaism. And the fourth generation are those that are so disconnected they might intermarry. They don't even know what it means to be a Jew. They don't even know how to ask a Jewish question because they are three generations removed from the Torah observant um, family. I found that very interesting. Okay. We talked about 15 is an important number, and we talked about the four children. Now I want to talk about the four cups of the Seder, because that's also very important. An important part of the Seder is these four cups, two in the first part and two in the second part that are drunk. We use grape juice. Some people start out, 4 cups of wine is a lot. Some people start out with wine and then they mix it with grape juice, and by the end they're drinking just grape juice, whatever. The truth is 4 cups of grape juice is also a lot. Um, but they're drunk throughout the evening at specific times, and the 4 cups symbolize four expressions of redemption, among other things. Redemption is, of course, the main theme of the Seder. The redemption from Egypt, we said, is a precursor to the Geula, to the final redemption. And so now I turn your attention to the book of Exodus, chapter 6, verses 6 and 7, where God is telling Moses to this. He says, therefore, say to the children of Israel, I am the Lord, and I will, number one, I will take you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. I will save you from their labor. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great judgments, and I will take you to me as a people, and I will be a God to you, and you will know that I am the Lord your God who has brought you out from under the burdens of Egypt. Okay, so those are four expressions of redemption. Behotseti, I will take you out. God removed the burden of slavery even before the Israelites left Egypt. The slavery ended in Tishrei, which you know is in the fall, but we didn't leave until Nisan, which is 6 months later. Vihitsalti, I will rescue you. God took us out of Egypt, physically rescued us. Vigaalti, I will redeem you. This refers to the miracle at the splitting of the sea, that the Israelites no longer had to worry about the Egyptians catching up to them because the Egyptians, as you know the story, were all drowned at the sea. And the punishment that God inflicted at the sea was 5 times more than the 10 plagues. So they were handled. Okay. Vilakachti, I will take you to me as a people. And that happened when? At Har Sinai, at Mount Sinai, when God gave us the Torah, which was the whole purpose of the Exodus. So that is redemptive significance of the 4 cups. But the rabbis see a fifth cup as symbolizing God bringing us to the land of Israel. And at the Seder, because there's something of a dispute, we pour but do not drink a fifth cup. And this is referred to as, in Hebrew, Kos Eliyahu, the cup of Elijah, because in Exodus 6, chapter 8, there's one additional promise, the Heveti, I will bring you to the land concerning which I raised my hand to give to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, and I will give it to you as a heritage. I am the Lord. So there's um, redemptive significance to these 4 cups. So let's talk about the plagues, the 10 plagues. So you see, I'm trying to give you like some deeper insights into parts of the we're on page 6 of 15 pages of notes that I prepared, so we are clearly not going to finish this today. But this is kind of interesting that the plagues were not just God imagining how can I annoy the Egyptians and enough to get them to release the slaves? How can I teach the Israelites that I'm in control of the world? But there's a very specific, what we call mida keneged mida. It's a way that God punishes. In Hebrew, in English, it's usually translated as mida keneged mida, measure for measure, which means that there's sort of justice in the nature of the plague. And I'm going to give you an example, okay? So the first plague is the plague of dam, of water turning to blood. So um, the Egyptians saw that the children of Israel would immerse in a mikveh um, when when they became impure. I think we talked about this last week about when a woman at the end of her cycle, she goes to the mikveh once a cycle. And so the Egyptians withheld water from them so they couldn't immerse in it in an attempt to stop them from procreating because a husband and a wife can't be together until the wife immerses in a mikveh. And so to punish them, Hashem turned all of the Egyptians' water to blood. That's one opinion. This immersion, which is still practiced today among Jews, is also the source for baptism. But there's another reason, and that is a simpler reason that the Egyptians forced the slaves, the Israelite slaves, to draw water for them. And so God is saying basically, you used water to oppress my children. I am going to use water and turn it into blood to get back at you. Okay, that's one. The second plague is Tzfardea, frogs. The Egyptians told the children of Israel to go out and bring them insects and other disgusting creatures in order that they could play with them. So God brought frogs on the Egyptians until the sounds of the frogs could be heard everywhere, even inside of the Egyptians. So um, it it's a little when I was growing up, my mother used to have an expression, if she thought I was crying for no reason, she used to say, "I'll give you something to cry about." Did you ever hear this from your parents? Yeah. Okay, so it's a little bit like that. Like you want to torture my people by making them go and, gather up insects and other disgusting creatures. I am going to so fill your universe with these disgusting, annoying frogs that they are even going to make noise inside your stomach. The third plague is called kinim in Hebrew, lice. The Egyptians would make the children of Israel sweep their houses, the streets, their markets. So God changed all of the dust in Egypt into lice until there's no more dust to sweep. Another reason is that the Egyptians prevented the children of Israel from bathing and from washing their clothes. And that, of course, you probably know is recipe for lice. So if you impose lice on my people, I am going to impose lice on you. What do we have? The fifth one is Arov, wild beasts. The Egyptians told the children of Israel to go and bring bears and lions to make games and contests with the animals. They had to risk their lives to go capture them. So God brought all of the wild animals against the Egyptians. The next plague is the pestilence of livestock. In Hebrew, it's called dever. The Egyptians made the children of Israel um, into shepherds of horses and camels and donkeys and cows and sheep. And because they abused them in that way, sickness came and killed all of the animals that they were being forced to shepherd until there were no more animals left for the Israelites to shepherd. I've lost count. I think we're up to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is number six. In English, it's boils. In Hebrew, shechin. The Egyptians made the children of Israel servants to warm the cold and to cool the hot. So if they if they had a tub of water that they thought was too hot to bathe in, let's say, they would make a slave sit in it to cool it down, um, and the reverse. So boils came that they would not be able to wash either in hot water or in cold water. Another reason is that the slavery was so intense that the children of Israel didn't even have, it's hard to imagine, like a moment to scratch themselves during the time that they were working hard. So God said, "You won't let my people scratch themselves. I will make it so you can't stop scratching." Then comes seven, Barad, hail. The Egyptians made the Israelites plant gardens, vineyards, trees, orchards, and so the hail was brought upon them, and they broke everything that they had been forced to plant under slavery. There was no more vegetation to take care of because the hail destroyed it all. The eighth plague is locusts. In Hebrew, we say arbeh. The Egyptians made the children of Israel farm wheat and barley, beans and lentils, all kinds of legumes. And so the locusts came and they ate up everything that the slaves um, had farmed, had sown. You see the pattern here that any way that the Egyptians benefited from the slave labor, the plague destroyed the benefit. Anything that they got as a benefit. Now comes the ninth plague, which we spoke about before. That is the plague of Choshech, of darkness. So during the plague of darkness, if an Egyptian would eat a meal at night before the plague, he would sometimes bring in a slave to and put a lamp on his head and say, make sure you don't bend your head from side to side, or else I'm going to cut your head off. Like he had to illuminate the area so the Egyptian could have light to eat by. So God introduces complete darkness. That's one level. On another level, I told you before that the Egyptians had, Kathy, I see that you made a comment. I just want to finish this, that the Egyptians, I'm sorry, that some of the Israelites were not prepared to give up idol worship, and God wanted to, um, I guess, prevent the embarrassment that he's going to kill them, he's going to end their lives, but he does it in complete darkness so that it was sort of between him and the Israelites that did not behave. Um, and um, um, so that was sort of like what we call the cover of darkness. I'm reading Kathy's comment.
It's just funny.
It is funny. Okay. You guys can look at it. It's not a question that she needs me to answer. Okay. All right. Then the last of the plagues, the killing of the firstborn children, Makot Bechorot, is where the Egyptians wanted we know this, that the Egyptians wanted to kill the children of Israel, at least the sons. There's another reason, and that is the entire time that the children of Israel are in exile. Rachel, our mother Rachel, Rachel Imenu, cries over her children. This is in Yirmiyahu, in the book of Jeremiah, not only once, but the entire time that they're in exile. And because the Egyptians caused Rachel to cry out loud, then God punished them with a different kind of crying out loud, as it says, by the death of the firstborn, and there was a great cry in all the land of Egypt. So the idea is that, again, I think I made the point that the plagues are in response to the actions of the Egyptians. They are a specific mida keneged mida, measure for measure response. You mistreated my people. I'm going to punish you in this specific way. That's on one level. But remember that we spoke about at the beginning that the plague served also the purpose of showing the Israelites who God is shaping and preparing. He knows that what's coming is the Torah, to accept the Torah, to accept the oneness of God, to accept the fact that the world has one creator and sustainer, and that is Hashem. And in order to do that, he has to remove any vestige or taint of idol worship. So the people who just did not get with the program, who died in the plague of darkness, and their deaths were covered up, so to speak. Now, I'm looking at the time and I'm seeing that we have like 10 minutes left. I just want to scan through my notes to because this piece on Dainu is like super long. Well, let's try. I'm not sure we're not going to get through all of it, but I told you that the number 15 is a significant number, and there's a song, um, Dainu, which is usually translated as "it would have been enough." 15 statements that correspond to the number of steps that the Levites stood on when they sang in the temple. That's another significance. So we have the 15th of Nisan, 15 steps of the Seder, um, 15 statements of Dainu, 15 steps that the Levites stood on when they sang in the temple. There's also in Tehillim, in the book of Psalms, from I think it's 120 to 135. Maybe it's 121 to 135. I'm not sure exactly, but those are that's a group of Psalms, 15 Psalms that the Levites said when they stood on these 15 steps of the temple. That I'm doing off the top of my head. I have notes of that. Okay, but let's talk about these 15 statements. The first one is just that God has granted us so many levels of favors. The second statement says, if God had taken us out of Egypt and not executed judgment on the Egyptians, it would have been enough for us. Okay. Like he redeemed us from slavery, took us out, but he also got rid of our enemies. And that was, if he hadn't done that, even if he hadn't done that, it would have been enough. You see how the language works. The third of the 15 steps. If God had executed judgment on the Egyptians and had not uh, made them on their gods, it would have been enough. So Hashem not only executed judgment on the Egyptians, but also took care of their gods. In this case, the lamb that they were worshiping and other forms of idol worship. If God had executed judgments on their gods and had not killed their firstborn, that's the 10th plague, it would have been enough for us. If God would have killed their firstborn and not given us their wealth, it would have been enough for us. Now, what does that mean? The children of Israel left Egypt with a lot of wealth. And it said that they were so anxious for them to leave at the end that the Egyptians basically were pressing all of their valuable possessions, jewelry and gems and gold and silver and all that, um, and pressing them into the hands of the Israelites and saying, just go. And we see a source for this in the book of Exodus, the book of Shemot, chapter 12, verses 35 and 36. And the children of Israel did according to Moses' order, and they borrowed from the Egyptians silver objects, golden objects, and garments. The Lord gave the people, the Israelite people, favor in the eyes of the Egyptians, and they lent them and they emptied out Egypt. So they didn't, it says lend, they didn't really just lend it, they left with it. Okay. So they left with great wealth. The sixth of the 15 statements, I'm trying to do this really fast to finish. If God had given us their wealth and had not split the sea for us, it would have been enough. If the seventh statement, if God had split the sea for us and had not taken us through on dry land, it would have been enough. The eighth statement, if God had taken us through on dry land and not drowned our enemies in the sea, it would have been enough. This story is so central to to Jewish consciousness. I just want to review it here, that God wanted to give this newly born nation the opportunity to transition from Egyptian influence and to get used to a Torah life. Because remember that they had just received the Torah. So the shortest route for the children of Israel to the Holy Land would have been straight through enemy territory. But God didn't want these newly freed slaves who were still weak from slavery to have to go to war with the Plishtim, with the Philistines, that were their enemies. And besides them not being strong enough to fight, they might decide this is all too much. Let's just go back to Egypt rather than face this deadly war. So instead of heading north along the Mediterranean, which is ironically the border of Gaza, God led them in a roundabout way through the desert to the south. So 3 days later, Paro learns where they are, and he assumes that they've gotten lost because they're going in this roundabout way that doesn't make sense. And he begins to rethink his decision to permit them to leave. And so he calls up his army, takes the lead, sets off to recapture and bring them back to Egypt to re-enslave them. The mental gymnastics after his country has been obliterated and so many people have died and there's no produce and there's no animals and there's so much suffering, to think that, oh well, I can just reverse the clock and go back to how it was before, reminds me a little bit of the enemies that we have now, the Arab terrorist enemies we have now, that do not seem to learn from history, and they keep trying the same thing over and over and over again that has never been successful. In any event, so Paro catches up with them near the banks of the Red Sea, and the people become frightened because their Egyptian enemies are behind them. The sea is in front of them, and they're trapped. So what do we do? There were basically three opinions. Um, some said they were ready to fight the Egyptians. Some said, I will drown in the sea instead of returning to slavery. And then some began to complain to Moses. And you see this in Exodus chapter 14, verses 11 through 12. where they say, "Is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you've taken us to die in the desert? Is this not the thing about which we spoke to you in Egypt, saying, 'Leave us alone, we will serve the Egyptians. We would rather serve the Egyptians than die in the desert.'" So um, this is like the ultimate chutzpah after everything that Moshe has done for this people, that they are accusing him of bringing them out into the desert just to kill them off. It's crazy. But Moshe is calm and firm in what has to be one of the most trying moments of his life. And he says to them, this is the very next verse, chapter 14, verse 13, "Don't be afraid, stand firm and see the Lord's salvation, that um, he will wreak for you today. For the way you have seen the Egyptians is only today. You shall no longer continue to see them for all of eternity." So he's saying, don't worry about it. God's going to help us out of this one. Um, okay. And then we have the miracle of the splitting of the sea. I'm going to skip this, the end of the Egyptian army, Israel's song of praise. I'm skipping all this stuff so we can get back to Dainu. We are on verse 11. "If God had fed us manna in the desert and had not given, wait, did I skip? I might have skipped too far. Hold on. Um, I'm missing two of them. Nope. "If God had drowned our enemies in the sea and had not supplied our needs in the wilderness for 40 years, it would have been enough." Okay. So that is a reference to the manna. Um, if God had supplied our needs in the wilderness for 40 years and had not fed us the manna, it would have been enough. There's a lot to say about that, but we don't have time. Um, verse 11, "If God had fed us the manna and had not given us Shabbat, it would have been enough." Shabbat, remember, is the foundation of all creation, so it's hard to understand like what this song is actually saying about that. But the 12th of the 15, "If God had given us the Shabbat and had not brought us close to Mount Sinai, it would have been enough." If Number 13, "If God had brought us close to Mount Sinai and had not given us the Torah, it would have been enough." 14, "If God had given us the Torah and not brought us into the land of Israel, it would have been enough." And 15, "If God had brought us into the land of Israel and had not built for us the temple, it would have been enough. Okay, a couple of lessons from Dainu, and then I'm going to end there. So the point is of this amazing song, which is sung in a very, very lively tune. We recognize that at every stage, we were not necessarily worthy of receiving the next gift, the next favor, but God, in His infinite mercy, nevertheless granted us whatever that next stage is. So, what is the lesson for us? That we need to thank God for every stage. And so that's not just true when recalling the story of the Exodus of Egypt, but it's true in life as well. Also, that redemption happens in stages, and every stage is an important part of the process, even if it isn't the final redemption. Okay. And the after the table's cleared, the second part of the Seder expands on this theme of gratitude, thanking God for all the times that He saved the Jewish people, and so on. There's obviously more to say about that, but we are out of time. Okay. So what I tried to do is give you um, some deeper insights into the Passover Seder, into the story, into some of the symbolism. As I said, there's so much more that could be shared, could be said, um, and um, and I don't know. It is one of the most it is the most central paradigm shifting experiences that the people of Israel have experienced until the arrival of Mashiach ben David and the full redemption. And so it's a huge deal. And I hope that there was something in tonight that you didn't know, that you learned, that will, whatever you're going to do for Passover, that will deepen your experience. I really want to thank you for the respectful way that you listened to what I had to say in the beginning. And I hope you received it in the spirit in which I intended. Um, and as always, the WhatsApp group is open for discussion. It is now an hour, so if anybody has to go, I totally understand. But if you want to stay and ask me anything now, I'm happy to stay for a couple extra minutes if you've got some comment or question to ask. Yes, Natalie.
is this book. I spoke already about it a few times, but this is amazing book. Whoops, The Last Slave, because it's explaining in the best way what happened during the Exodus, during the redemption of Egypt. And he's speaking about all the plagues, not at all like what we know, but with so much depth and reality. And it's this book is just changed my life. He makes me understand also more the step that like the world is going through now till the last redemption. You read things and it's like, oh my gosh, this is what's happening in the news. So this was, I read it last year. I read it twice, and it's not very pleasant in some places because it's really gruesome. But it is like it's so important to understand, as you said, like redemption. They were through slavery, um, and and we don't always understand the reality of it. And she explained it very, very well in that book.
I want
The
to
husband, the husband did all the research, midrash and everything, and she put it in a story.
So I want to say because what you said reminds me of this idea that our rabbis say that the generation of redemption, the generation of the final redemption, which God willing is this generation, is a reincarnation of the generation that left Egypt, and that you sort of said it without maybe knowing this piece of Torah that there is a an echo of what happened to the nation and the world at the time of the Exodus from Egypt that will recur in in the end of days. And so there's a parallel between them. And so if you see connections between what's going on now and what happened in that redemption story, it totally makes sense. Anything else? Anybody else before we finish up?
I
Okay.
just had a quick
Yes.
comment because I actually heard this teaching on the Egyptians worshipping the lamb as an idol just recently, actually. So that was quite an eye opener, and it just shows how much God takes idolatry seriously. I mean, this is just so important, and we should not take it lightly. So,
It is hard. I mean, it's, it's one of the Ten Commandments. It's hard to imagine. Um, it's hard to imagine a sin that God detests even
mhm,
more. And it makes sense because it's basically a negation of the fundamental principle that God runs the world, right? If there's other factors. Now, I want to tell you that um, I had an experience. I do book reviews for the Jerusalem Post, and somebody pitched a book to me called Kosher Astrology. And I thought, I think that's what it was called. I'll find it for you. And I thought kosher astrology, like what is kosher about astrology? And it turns out, so I asked my teacher about it, and it turns out that what, like when you read your horoscope in the newspaper or something silly like that, that's just silliness. But that what I said very early in tonight's talk,
mhm.
that the about this that
Translation.
the constellations, that the Egyptians misunderstood the constellations not as a tool of a higher power, but as having independent power in and
Mhm.
of themselves. So there is something to be said um, about the constellations and about astrology that is completely consistent with Torah, but not the worship of it, as you
Yeah,
said.
yeah.
Okay. All right.
I have a
Uh,
question.
yes, go ahead.
I just want to know if you do when you do your Seder, do you do it all in Hebrew or you do some in Hebrew, some in English, or is it what how do you
That's a great question. So when we lived in America, we did both. All of the narrative stuff in Magid we did in English, but there's certain songs that we did in Hebrew. But now I have grandchildren who are born and are being educated in Israel, and they learned it in Hebrew. So a lot of people have a custom, you probably seen this, of going around the table and everybody reads like a little chunk.
Mhm.
So most people in our family read it in Hebrew. But we have there's like about 10,000. I don't know if there's an enormous number of Haggadahs that are in the marketplace. And ours, just this last week, there was a big Haggadah sale in our community, and I bought two more. Not that I need two more, but each one of them has a slightly different angle, and different commentary on the different aspects of the Haggadah and so forth. And so everybody has a different one. And so sometimes we may say the official part of the Haggadah in Hebrew, but then when we're discussing ideas, we would discuss them in English. But there are families who just say the Haggadah and don't have any commentary. Um, and they may do that entirely in Hebrew, entirely in English. It doesn't matter. Or other languages. There's I remember years ago going to a Seder where people said the four questions in a bunch of different languages. Here's what it sounds like in German. Here's what it sounds like in Spanish. Here's what it sounds like in Portuguese. Here's what it sounds like, whatever. Um, and so that can be fun if you have somebody who can do that. There's there are endless variations on different customs and different ways to make the Seder come alive. So it's not just like boring reading out of a book. Okay, you guys. So we're not meeting next week. The Seder for us here in Israel is Saturday night. For those people who live outside of the land of Israel, there are two Sedarim, Saturday night and Sunday night, which I don't know how many of you are going to be making one, participating in one, but to the extent that you are going to have any kind of a Passover experience, I wish you a Chag Kasher v'Sameach, a happy and kosher Passover holiday. And I'll see you, God willing, I think in 2 weeks. Okay?
Thank you. Thank you so
Thank you.
much. Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Thank you. Bye.